Chapter 1. Luca Vitiello didn't do fear. Fear was a contagion, a weakness that fractured the armor he wore, and in this life, a fracture meant death. But sitting in the cold, marble-lined boardroom, flanked by his two most trusted capos, a familiar dread coiled in his gut, tighter than the knot in his bespoke silk tie. It wasn't the sound of the enemy approaching, nor the unexpected sound of a police siren. It was the soft, measured tick of the antique clock in the corner, counting down the time he didn't have. Across the room, the Commission, the ruling body of the 5 families, finished their customary glass of scotch and leveled their gaze at him. They weren't looking at the Don, the man who had tripled the family's holdings in 3 years through cold, calculated violence. They were looking at a vulnerability, and they were ready to exploit it. "It has been 6 months, Luca," old Sal Marucci stated, his voice a gravelly indictment that cracked the boardroom silence. "The Vitiello line demands continuity. The alliances are restless." Luca kept his face a mask of granite, a skill honed since childhood. "The business is secure, Sal. The new shipping routes are running at peak efficiency." "The bloodline is what secures the alliances, boy, not the docks," Sal snapped, slamming his fist on the mahogany table with a jarring sound. "You will find a wife. You will breed an heir. You will do it within the next year, or we will find a man who can." The ultimatum hung heavy in the air, a guillotine blade waiting to drop. The irony was exquisite. Luca, the ruthless Don who could order a man's execution without blinking, was paralyzed by the simple expectation of intimacy. Luca Vitiello was a virgin. His father, a paranoid, brutal pragmatist, had drilled one truth into him. Intimacy is a liability. A woman was a vector for betrayal, a soft spot an enemy could exploit. He had spent his life focused on discipline, on physical domination in combat, on the psychological control of his rivals. When it came to a bed, he was worse than inexperienced. He was repulsed by the idea of losing control. And now, the fate of his entire legacy hinged on him performing an act that felt like signing his own death warrant. He had to fake mastery, and he had no idea how. He dismissed the commission with a curt nod, the meeting having lasted precisely 7 minutes. 7 minutes that dictated the next 50 years of his life. The door clicked shut, and the only person left in the vast silence was Seraphina Leone. Seraphina, his executive assistant, his gatekeeper. At 29, she was 3 years older than him, smarter than almost every man in his organization, and the only person allowed to witness the private, strategic moments of his life. She was the definition of ruthless efficiency. Sharp, dark, and utterly untouchable. Her dark hair was always pulled into a severe braid. Her clothing was tailored armor, and her expression was permanent, cool indifference. She looked less like an assistant and more like a human contingency plan. She was currently organizing files with the practiced ease of a general coordinating troop movements. "The Marucci contract renewal is next week," she stated, not looking up. "We need to adjust the terms. They're getting greedy." "Forget Marucci," Luca said, the low growl in his voice startling even himself. He walked over to the windows overlooking the city he owned, yet felt utterly trapped within. Seraphina stopped working. That meant the situation was critical. "The commission gave me an ultimatum," he admitted, turning back to face her. "A year, a wife, an heir, or they replace me." Seraphina's expression didn't change, but her eyes, the color of burnt whiskey, narrowed infinitesimally. "You have plenty of suitable prospects. The Santoro girl is beautiful and fertile. The Vitiello alliance needs shoring up with the Moretti family. This is not insurmountable, Luca. It is when I cannot perform the most fundamental duty of a husband, he bit out, the words tasting like ash. It was the first time he had spoken that truth aloud to anyone. The ultimate shame. Seraphina blinked once, twice. She set the folder down, a motion that sounded like a gunshot in the silence, and stepped closer, crossing her arms over her chest. Are you implying a medical issue, Don? Her voice remained level, a soothing lie over a jagged truth. No, I am implying a training issue. Luca gripped the back of a leather chair so tightly his knuckles turned white they could shatter the wood. I have spent my life mastering how to break a man, how to command a room, how to kill quickly and quietly. I have no instruction manual for this. I don't know how to touch a woman without feeling like I should be wearing gloves. I don't know how to be vulnerable without being weak. He walked the distance across the room, stopping directly in front of her. The tension between them was not sexual, but an acknowledgement of impossible shared stakes. I need a teacher, Seraphina, someone I trust implicitly, someone who understands stakes and contracts, someone who will never, under any circumstance, betray me. His eyes dropped to her hands, which were clenched at her sides. He knew she was in trouble. He knew about the debt her reckless father had run up with the Russo syndicate. He knew the threats they'd been sending her, the grim package delivered last week disguised as flowers. Luca's resources made her problems an inconvenience. For her, they were a ticking clock toward death. I know about the Russo debt, Seraphina. $2 million plus interest. It's too much for you to handle alone. They are threatening your father, and by extension, you. Seraphina's composure finally shattered, a hairline crack of shock and shame. You spied on me? I protect my assets, Luca corrected, leaning in close enough that the scent of his expensive cologne, something clean and sharp, like cool steel, hit her. And you, Sarah, are my most critical asset. He delivered the offer, low and lethal. I will wipe the debt. I will give you a permanent, untraceable security detail for your father and your sister. I will give you more money than you would see in 10 years in this chair. In return, you will teach me how to touch a woman, how to kiss, how to pleasure, how to command respect in bed. You will prepare me for my Don's wife, and when I am ready, you will disappear and never speak a word of this to anyone. Seraphina looked up, her whiskey eyes flashing with a terrible mixture of terror and calculation. He saw the fire of the Leone blood in her, the part that wouldn't submit to a threat, but would submit to a deal to save her family. And if I refuse, she whispered, the challenge barely audible. Luca didn't blink. Then the Russos claim you, and I am left looking weak when they use you against me. I hate loose ends, Seraphina. You are either my greatest defense or my greatest vulnerability. Choose your ground. The weight of the decision settled on her shoulders. The cold, heavy realization that in the Mafia, even survival was just a contract waiting to be signed. She could die at the hands of the enemy, or sell her control to the Don she served. I accept, Don, she said, her voice dry and brittle, the word Don now laced with a new, dangerous implication. But we need a lawyer. We need an NDA that will bury this so deep, not even the commission could dig it up. Luca finally smiled, a cold, sharp predator's smile that never touched his eyes. Always thinking ahead, Seraphina. That is why I chose you. He stepped away, the victory secured, but the tension was no longer about money or power. It was about what was coming next. The contract was signed, but the consequences were unwritten.
Chapter 2. Seraphina. The lawyer Luca used wasn't just old and discreet. He was a ghost. A specialist in legal vanishing acts, operating from a soundproofed, reinforced bunker beneath a seemingly abandoned warehouse. The sterile environment, all polished chrome and cold concrete, perfectly mirrored the clinical, dangerous nature of the business Seraphina was about to transact. Seraphina sat across a massive steel table from Luca, the hefty NDA document resting between them like a ceremonial blade. She had spent the last 2 days meticulously reviewing the clauses, her mind operating with the speed and precision of a code cracker. Luca's legal team had ensured his protection. Penalties for exposure that would strip her bare and leave her destitute, even if the commission didn't get to her first. But Seraphina was a strategist. She didn't fight the walls, she weaponized them. "This document must be airtight, Don," Seraphina insisted, tapping a manicured nail on Clause 7, confidentiality. Her voice was pure professional ice, giving away none of the terror that churned beneath her tailored black suit. "This cannot be simply an agreement of silence. This has to be a mutual destruction clause. If anyone outside this room, including the woman you choose to marry, ever learns of this arrangement, both our lives are forfeit." Luca, dressed in a sharp black turtleneck that made him look less like a Don and more like a minimalist, lethal statue, watched her with unnerving stillness. "You fear exposure more than you fear me, Sarah." She met his intense gray gaze without flinching. "I fear the chaos exposure would cause, Luca. The Russos, the commission, your own men. I fear the inevitable consequence of a woman getting too close to the Dawn and believing she has leverage. This contract is the only thing keeping my neck straight." The lawyer, who had already satisfied the Russo debt with a single massive wire transfer that morning, cleared his throat. "The terms are clear, Ms. Leone. Full payment to satisfy outstanding debts, protection detail established, and a substantial final severance upon successful completion, contingent on absolute silence and immediate relocation." He slid the heavy document toward Luca. Luca signed first, his signature surprisingly elegant, yet firm. He pushed the document to Seraphina. As she picked up the pen, the full weight of her decision pressed down on her. $2 million, deposited instantly into a secure offshore account, was now tied to selling her body and her expertise to the coldest man she knew. She wasn't selling sex. She was selling power inversion. She was selling her control. "I need to add a clause," Seraphina stated, her voice steady. Luca raised an eyebrow, a flicker of genuine interest passing over his features. "Add it." Seraphina pushed the document back to the lawyer. "In the bedroom, the hierarchy reverses. You are my student, and you follow my explicit direction. I set the curriculum, the pace, and the rules of engagement. You cannot veto a lesson unless it violates a prior agreed-upon safety term. You have to submit to my instruction until I deem you ready." The lawyer glanced at Luca, awaiting the execution order, or at least a furious denial. Luca leaned forward, his elbows resting on the steel table. "You want dominance over the Dawn, Seraphina? You want to command me?" "I want control over the variable, Luca," she corrected, her voice low and tight. "You need to learn to surrender to pleasure, to accept kindness, and to trust. You can only learn that if you're not the one in charge. If you refuse to relinquish control during the instruction phase, I cannot guarantee success. Your problem is not physical prowess, Don. Your problem is emotional surrender. That only happens when you are actively submitting." A long, thick silence ensued. The air in the room grew heavy, charged not with hostility, but with the sudden, sharp tension of two alphas measuring each other's resolve. Seraphina realized this was the true risk, not the Russos, but the raw ego of the man across from her. Finally, Luca gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Fine, but know this. I am a very quick learner, Sarah, and I will eventually take back the reins, It is a fundamental law of nature. Seraphina signed the NDA, the act burning the bridge between her current life and her future. Her father and sister were safe. Now she had to navigate the next 12 months in a bed with the man who owned her city. And now, temporarily, her will. That evening, the Vitiello compound was eerily quiet. Seraphina reported to the Don's personal wing, a space she had only ever entered to deliver classified reports or check on his security systems. The rooms were minimalist, decorated in shades of gray and black. Cold, sterile, and impersonal. She found him not in his vast, underutilized library, but in his private gym, a space even more intimidating than his office. Luca was hitting a heavy bag with the kind of ruthless precision that characterized his leadership. He was shirtless, his back a canvas of hard, defined muscle, sweat plastering his dark hair to his temples. Every strike was a controlled explosion of power. She stood in the doorway, armed with her black curriculum notebook and a bottle of water. This was her armor now, unwavering professionalism. "We start in 10 minutes, she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. Luca didn't stop. Thwack, thwack, thwack. "The setting is inappropriate for the first lesson, Seraphina. I prefer the clean lines of the sitting room." "No, it's not," she countered, stepping inside. The metallic scent of sweat and leather was thick here. "The first lesson is not about sex, Luca. It's about de-escalation. Your body is trained to attack, to defend, to control. If I take you straight to a bed, you'll treat it like a battle. We start here, where your defenses are highest, where you feel most powerful." He finally stopped, the heavy bag swaying gently. He didn't turn around, but she felt his intense focus. "And what is the curriculum, Professor?" he asked, his voice low and dripping with challenge. Seraphina tossed the towel at his head. It landed perfectly. "Your first assignment is to clean up, put on soft clothes, cashmere, sweats, nothing that feels like a uniform or armor. And then, you will report to the sitting room. You will sit. You will listen. And you will take the first command without question." She turned to leave. "Seraphina." His voice was a low warning, the tone of a Don who was used to instant, absolute obedience. She paused at the door, her hand resting on the smooth, cold brass knob. "I may be your student in this," he said, finally turning to face her, his chest heaving slightly from exertion. His eyes were cold, assessing. "But you are still standing on my ground. Do not forget who the Don is." Seraphina allowed herself a small, icy, victorious smile. "I know exactly who you are, Luca, and I know precisely what you are capable of. The terms of the NDA grant me control of this process. The Commission wants a man who can secure his legacy, not a frightened boy playing dress-up. If you want to survive, you will obey my instruction. I am the Don here, for the next 3 hours." She left the room before he could respond, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was terrified, but she was in control. She was dismantling the Don, piece by calculated piece. Chapter 3. Seraphina. The sitting room on the Don's floor was designed for cold negotiation, not intimacy. It featured 2 sterile leather club chairs facing each other, a minimalist marble fireplace, and recessed lighting that made everything look institutional. It was a space that demanded logic, not feeling. When Seraphina returned, Luca was already there. He had followed her instruction, but with visible rebellion. He was wearing a soft, heather-gray cashmere sweater and dark sweatpants, clothes that usually remained folded and forgotten in his expansive closet. They made him look younger, softer, and crucially less imposing, a stark contrast to the coiled tension in his shoulders. He looked like a handsome, deadly graduate student waiting for a difficult exam. He had chosen the chair facing the fireplace. Seraphina took the opposite one, ensuring the light was neutral. She held a black notebook, the curriculum, and a pen. "Rule 1, she began, her voice professional, completely devoid of flirtation. No agenda, no goal except to observe. You are not here to pleasure me, and you are not here to complete a task. You are here to learn how your body communicates before your mouth does. Luca leaned back, his long legs stretched out. I believe my body communicates efficiency, intimidation, control. It does, Seraphina agreed, making a note. But the man who communicates only those things can only command fear. Your future wife needs to see desire, tenderness, and safety. She needs to see the man who can protect her, not just destroy her enemies. She set the notebook down and met his gaze. First command, you will not speak unless I ask you a direct question. Luca's jaw tightened, the effort to remain silent a visible battle against his nature. He gave a sharp, curt nod. Good. Now, look at my hands. He immediately obeyed, his intense gray eyes locking onto her hands, which rested calmly on her knees. The focus was so sharp it felt like a physical weight. Tell me what you see, she asked. His silence stretched, a palpable thing in the room. His eyes were dissecting her, analyzing her skin, the silver rings she wore, the slight tremble that she hoped he didn't notice. Speak, Luca. I see competence, he finally answered, the word clipped. I see precision, no dirt, no sign of manual labor. They are hands of administration. Seraphina smiled, a genuine, brief flash of warmth that surprised them both. That is the professional assessment. Now, the second layer, the intimate layer. What do you feel when you look at them? Do you want to touch them? Do you want to hurt them? Do you want to lift them to your mouth? Luca frowned. This was the first time she had introduced desire into the equation. He shifted uncomfortably in the soft chair. His eyes, however, stayed glued to her hands. The room temperature seemed to rise 3 degrees. They are a distraction, he admitted, his voice low and ragged. They are small. They are too vulnerable to be resting there unguarded. Seraphina felt a strange warmth spread through her stomach. He saw her fragility, the thing she tried so hard to hide. They are not unguarded. They are simply not fighting. She stood up and walked the short distance between them. She stopped directly in front of his knees, looking down at his face. His scent, the lingering sweat and steel from the gym, mixed with the soft cashmere, was dizzying. Second command. You will not move. You will not flinch. You will not close your eyes. Luca's expression hardened, anticipation mixing with the iron will of a man who never broke discipline. Seraphina reached out, slowly. She didn't touch him yet, letting her fingertips hover just over the soft, vulnerable skin of his neck, where his pulse hammered a furious, fast rhythm. Your hands know how to strangle, she murmured, her voice silk over steel. They know how to draw blood. They do not know how to give comfort. I will teach them. But first you must learn how to receive. She pressed her thumb directly into the base of his throat, resting her fingers lightly on his jaw. It was a gesture that held both threat and tender intimacy. Her proximity was suffocating. Luca's eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were wide and dark, fixed entirely on her face. His silence was potent. He was fighting the urge to react, to recoil, to seize her, to run. Tell me what you feel, Luca, she commanded, tilting her head. Conflict, he choked out, his voice barely audible. I feel the urge to push you back, but I also feel a pull. I feel the safety of your control. You are guarding me, even now. She traced the sharp angle of his jaw, the contact so feather-light it was almost maddening. This was not the fear of a woman being seized. This was the power of a woman granting permission for a man to be gentle. I am not guarding you, Luca. I am showing you that you do not always have to fight. You can be still. You can be soft. You can receive pleasure without it costing you your power. She knelt before him, bringing her eyes level with his. The air was heavy with heat and unspoken tension. Her breath feathered against his lips. Now, she whispered, her hands dropping to his waist, feeling the taut muscle even beneath the cashmere. Third command, kiss me, do not take, do not conquer, just kiss me, and do not let go until I tell you to. This was the core of the lesson, the moment the professional barrier was meant to break. Luca didn't hesitate this time. All the tension in his rigid body focused into the single, consuming action of his mouth meeting hers. It wasn't soft. It was the raw, starved force of a man who had denied himself sustenance for decades. It was a hungry, fumbling collision of lips and teeth, powerful and deeply unsatisfying, because he was attempting to conquer a pleasure he didn't understand. Seraphina pulled back instantly, breaking the kiss after only a second. Luca's eyes snapped open, blazing with confusion and immediate aggression. He had been rejected. The Don was used to success. "What was that?" he demanded, the command overriding the earlier instruction for silence. "That," Seraphina breathed, her own pulse ragged. "Was you trying to take the objective? You tried to dominate the kiss, Luca. You didn't taste me. You didn't feel the surrender. You were in control, and you were terrible at it." She watched the cold, calculated shame flood his face, worse than any physical blow. "We try again. Fourth command, hands on my face, softly, no gripping, and this time you submit to my lead." She took his large, calloused hands and guided them to frame her jaw, forcing his touch to be delicate. She leaned in again, and this time, when their lips met, she controlled the rhythm. She opened her mouth just enough to invite him in, not demand his entry. She moved with patient, deliberate slowness, teaching him the language of intimacy instead of the language of war. The change was immediate and devastating. Luca, forced to follow her lead, stopped fighting. He leaned into the touch, a low, guttural sound escaping his throat as his body finally, painfully, allowed itself to feel something other than the need for control. Seraphina deepened the kiss, allowing the raw hunger she saw in his eyes to mix with the tender deference he offered. He was a perfect student, terrifyingly intense, and now terrifyingly obedient to her command. She knew in that moment that she wasn't just teaching him how to kiss. She was dismantling his entire defense system. And that, she realized with a sickening jolt, made her the most dangerous thing in his life. She was the one holding the demolition trigger. Chapter 4. Seraphina. The aftermath of the kiss was a searing, chaotic silence. Luca was breathing the heavy, shallow breaths of a man who had just run a 3-mile sprint, carrying a 50-pound vest. His large hands, which Seraphina had guided to cup her face, were trembling slightly against her skin. He was staring at her with wide, pupils dilated intensity, the look of a predator who had just realized his prey was the most dangerous creature he'd ever encountered. Seraphina was equally wrecked. The kiss hadn't just been an instruction, it had been an electrical current. She had felt the precise moment the rigid wall surrounding Luca Vitiello fractured, allowing raw, desperate hunger to flood forward. It was potent, terrifying, and utterly addictive. She gently removed his hands from her face, placing them back on his cashmere-covered knees, and stood up, retreating to the safety of her professional distance. "Your assessment, Luca," she commanded, her voice slightly rougher than usual. She picked up her notebook, using the physical act of writing to recenter herself. He ignored the notebook, pushing himself forward in the chair. "What did you do?" His voice was a low snarl, but it lacked command. It was purely confused. "I taught you how to follow a lead," Seraphina explained, flipping open to the next blank page. "When a woman initiates and controls the rhythm, it forces the man to focus on receiving, rather than taking. You were waiting for my cues. You felt the difference." Luca's intense gaze dropped to the indentation her lips had left on his. "I felt weakness. A surrender I cannot afford." "That is the primary hurdle," Seraphina agreed, making a note. Subject interprets tenderness as tactical error. Your father trained you to believe that vulnerability costs you power. I am here to teach you that selective vulnerability is power. It generates loyalty. It generates devotion. No woman, not even a strategic mafia bride, will submit to a man who only knows how to command with cold metal. She knelt beside him again, not to kiss, but to offer comfort. This was the hardest part of the curriculum. She reached out, placing her hand gently, openly on his forearm. Luca flinched. Not a dramatic jump, but a tightening of muscle, a minute recoil that confirmed the psychological root of his physical abstinence. That is lesson 2, she stated calmly, ignoring the flinch. The lesson of stillness. Your body is trained to react to touch as a prelude to combat. When a woman touches you like this, she ran her thumb slowly over the cashmere covering his skin. You must learn to stay in the moment, stay in the safety of the contact. Seraphina waited, applying gentle pressure. Seconds bled into eternity. Luca's muscles remained rigid beneath her touch, but he didn't pull away. He was obeying the instruction, fighting his deep-seated instinct to flee contact. Tell me about your father, she asked, pivoting the subject sharply. The NDA allowed her full access to his psychological terrain, and she would use it. Luca's eyes glazed over, staring past her toward the wall. He was meticulous. He believed any expression of comfort was a crack in the foundation. He never touched my mother. Not in public, not in private. His touch was always corrective. Corrective? Luca let out a harsh, humorless laugh. He preferred the back of the hand, or the belt, to show me that pain was the only trustworthy constant. That if I were disciplined enough, pain would cease. Love was a foolish fantasy. Seraphina absorbed this like a therapist, but her heart twisted with genuine sympathy. This wasn't the ruthless Don she filed contracts for. This was a deeply scarred man. Now touch me, she commanded. Not intimately. Just rest your hand on my shoulder. Try to offer comfort. Luca lifted his massive hand, hesitating as if it were coated in poison. His fingers, which could crush a man's windpipe, trembled again as they lowered onto her shoulder. The weight of his touch was cautious, yet heavy. What do you feel? She prompted. Muscle tension, he admitted, his eyes analyzing the subtle shift in her posture. You are tense and small. No, Seraphina corrected softly, letting her control slip just slightly. You are feeling the weight of the moment. Now look at my mouth and tell me something funny. Something I don't know. Luca stared at her, genuinely baffled. Funny? I don't recall. I believe the last time I observed humor was watching a security feed where our rival, Old Man Mancini, tripped over a puppy. Seraphina burst out laughing, a genuine, high-pitched, entirely unprofessional sound. It was the first truly unguarded sound she had made in his presence, and it made her cheeks flush. She laughed until tears pricked the corners of her eyes, a spontaneous release of the tension that had gripped her for days. Luca's stare intensified, but this time, the confusion was softer. He was mesmerized by the sound, studying the way her face broke when she laughed. His mouth even curved slightly, a ghost of an amused expression. What? She asked, still breathless from the absurdity. It is loud, Luca observed, tilting his head slightly. But it is not aggressive. It generates a surprising sense of ease. I see why humans utilize it. It's efficient at dispelling stress. Seraphina shook her head, still smiling. That, Luca, is connection. It makes me trust you more than all the men you have killed combined. The stillness lesson is complete. Now let's go to the bedroom. Luca's pupils immediately dilated, the command in his eyes reigniting. The shift from cold analysis to intense, focused hunger was immediate. The bedroom? I thought we were de-escalating. We have de-escalated the touch. Now we escalate the intent, she said, standing up and retrieving her notebook. The next lesson is about proximity and respect. We are moving to a safe house in Tribeca. Pack soft clothes only. No weapons allowed inside the house. You will submit to the environment. She saw the internal debate rage across his face, the demand for control fighting the promise of pleasure, and the fear of the unknown. He knew the safe house was outside his primary security sphere, a terrifying vulnerability. But the man who had terrified the entire commission gave a reluctant nod. He was addicted to her instruction, terrified of his own inadequacy, and desperate for the fulfillment she represented. $2 million to teach the Don how to love, Seraphina thought, collecting her clipboard. This isn't an NDA, this is a demolition sequence. She had just survived the first lesson, but she knew the final consequence would be the destruction of her heart. Chapter 6, Seraphina. The silence in the armored SUV was heavier than the steel-reinforced doors. Luca sat beside me, staring straight ahead, his profile cut from granite and shadow. He hadn't said a word since he shoved me into the back seat and barked at his driver to drive. His hand rested on his thigh, inches from mine, still, relaxed, and terrifying. It wasn't the hand of a student anymore. It was the hand of the man who had just crushed Franco Russo's wrist like a dry twig because he dared to whisper in my ear. My heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The NDA, the rules, the carefully constructed hierarchy I had built to keep us both safe. It had all just been incinerated in the ballroom of the Pierre Hotel. Luca, I started, my voice sounding thin in the pressurized cabin. We need to discuss damage control. Assaulting the Russo heir at a neutral event is a declaration of, stop. He didn't shout. He didn't turn his head. The word was a low, vibrating command that snapped my mouth shut instantly. He turned slowly to look at me. The streetlights outside flickered over his face, illuminating eyes that were no longer gray. They were black, dilated holes of obsession. Do not speak to me of politics, Seraphina. Not tonight. I am your advisor, I countered, clinging to the shred of professional ground I had left. It is my job to speak of politics. Your job, he said, reaching out to trace the line of my jaw with a single, calloused finger, was to teach me, and I have learned. The car screeched to a halt in front of the Tribeca safe house. Before the driver could even scramble out to open the door, Luca had kicked it open. He gripped my hand, fingers interlaced, no gaps, and pulled me out onto the pavement. He didn't wait for the elevator code. He punched it in with violent efficiency, dragging me into the metal box. As the doors slid shut, sealing us in, the air instantly vanished. He backed me into the corner of the elevator. He didn't touch me, but he loomed over me, boxing me in with his forearms resting against the steel walls on either side of my head. He smelled of expensive scotch, cold night air, and the metallic tang of violence. You told me to identify what I wanted, he murmured, leaning down until his nose brushed mine. You told me to visualize it, to claim it. I told you to visualize a future wife. I breathed, my hands flat against his chest, feeling the thundering of his heart. It was beating as fast as mine. I visualized you. The elevator dinged. The doors opened to the dark loft. Luca grabbed my waist, lifting me effortlessly off the ground as he strode into the apartment. He kicked the door shut behind us and didn't bother with the lights. The only illumination came from the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city of New York bleeding neon light onto the white floors. He set me down in the center of the room, but he didn't step back. The lesson is over, Seraphina, he stated, stripping off his tuxedo jacket and tossing it carelessly onto the floor. He undid his cufflinks, the silver clinking as they hit the concrete. Then he rolled up his sleeves, revealing the thick cords of muscle in his forearms. The NDA is suspended. You can't suspend a contract unilaterally, I argued, stepping back. My heels hit the edge of the white rug. That's not how it works. I am the Don, he growled, stalking toward me. I am the law, and right now the only law in this room is that you are wearing a dress that I have wanted to remove for 3 hours. He reached me. I expected rough handling. I expected the awkward fumbling of a virgin who had lost his temper. I was wrong. Luca spun me around with fluid, terrifying grace. His hands settled on my hips, heavy and possessive, pulling my back flush against his chest. He buried his face in the curve of my neck, inhaling deeply, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin over my pulse. Do not move, he commanded against my skin. It was an echo of my own command from the first lesson, thrown back at me with 10 times the authority. I froze. My body betrayed me instantly, melting into his heat. You taught me to be still, he whispered, his hands sliding up my ribcage, feeling the frantic beat of my heart. Now you be still. Let me show you what I learned. His fingers found the zipper of the red dress. He didn't rip it. He didn't rush. He lowered the zipper slowly, agonizingly, exposing inch after inch of my spine to the cool air of the loft. He followed the zipper with his mouth, pressing hot, open-mouth kisses to my vertebrae, tasting me. Luca, I gasped, my head falling forward. We can't. The consequences are irrelevant, he murmured. The dress pooled at my feet, a puddle of red silk. I was left standing in my black lace lingerie and heels, exposed to the city and to the man who owned it. He turned me around. His eyes swept over me, devouring every inch of skin I had kept hidden under tailored suits for 5 years. There was no clinical assessment in his gaze now. It was pure, unadulterated worship. Beautiful, he breathed, the word sounding like a prayer. You are a weapon, Sarah. My weapon. He dropped to his knees. I stared down at him, shocked. Don Luca Vitiello, the man who knelt for no one, was on his knees between my legs. Luca, get up, I whispered, panic warring with desire. This isn't part of the curriculum. No, he agreed, looking up at me, his gray eyes burning with a dark, feral intelligence. This is the practical application. He placed his hands on my waist, his thumbs pressing into my skin, grounding me. The look in his eyes was so intense, so filled with raw, concentrated hunger, that the air left my lungs. He wasn't asking for permission. He was telling me that everything I was, everything I had been hiding, now belonged to him. When he leaned forward, pressing a kiss to the inside of my thigh, my knees buckled. Luca, I choked out, my hands tangling in his dark hair, gripping him tight. Let go, Seraphina, he ordered, his voice a low vibration against my skin. I have you. And then he destroyed me. It wasn't a battle for control anymore. It was a surrender. The world narrowed down to the heat of his touch, and the sound of my own name falling from his lips like a devotion. I had spent years building walls to keep the world out, to keep myself safe, but Luca didn't climb the walls. He simply walked through them as if they were smoke. I shattered completely. I cried out, arching back, lost in a storm of sensation that wiped my mind clean of contracts, of debts, of enemies. There was only Luca. Only the man who had learned to love by learning to worship. Time lost its meaning. When the world finally came back into focus, the city lights were still blurring through the windows. Luca picked me up, actually picked me up, cradling me against his chest like I weighed nothing, and walked toward the massive white bed in the corner of the loft. He laid me down on the sheets, looming over me. He stood there, chest heaving, looking at me like I was a kingdom he had just conquered and would burn the world to keep. You asked for a teacher, I whispered, my voice wrecked, my hand reaching out to touch his face. I think the lessons are over. Luca shook his head slowly. He crawled onto the bed, caging me in with his body, his weight a heavy, comforting blanket. No, Seraphina, he said, his voice a low, dark promise against my lips. The lessons on how to do this are over. Now begins the lesson on who you belong to. He kissed me then. A deep, bruising kiss that tasted of me and him and finality. I closed my eyes, feeling the NDA dissolving in my mind. I was terrified. The Russos were out there. The Commission was watching. But lying there under the weight of the dawn, I realized the most terrifying thing of all wasn't the danger. It was the fact that I didn't want to run anymore. I was standing on his ground, and I never wanted to leave.
Chapter 7. Luca. The sun hit the white floorboards of the Tribeca loft like a blinding interrogation light. Usually, I woke up before dawn, my body alerted by the internal clock of a man who expected every shadow to hold a knife. I would wake up alone, cold, and instantly calculating the logistics of the day. Shipping routes, rival movements, money laundering schedules. Today, I woke up warm. There was a weight on my chest, a soft, rhythmic pressure that synced with my own breathing. I looked down. Seraphina was asleep on top of me. Her dark hair was a chaotic spill of ink across my skin, hiding her face. Her hand was curled loosely over my heart, her fingers resting against the tattoo of the Vitiello crest I bore there. For a long time, I didn't move. I didn't breathe deeply for fear of waking her. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, cataloging the catastrophic shift in my reality. The monk was dead. The disciplined, unfeeling machine my father had built to run the 5 families had been dismantled, stripped for parts, and reassembled into something starving. I lifted my hand, studying the tremors that usually plagued me when I broke routine. There were none. My hand was steady. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety that had been the soundtrack of my life since I was 16 was gone. It had been silenced by the scent of vanilla and the memory of her name broken on a cry of pleasure. Seraphina stirred. I felt the exact moment consciousness returned to her. Her body stiffened. The relaxed, heavy warmth vanished, replaced by the rigid tension of the executive assistant. She pushed herself up, clutching the sheet to her chest. Her eyes were wide, whiskey-colored panic darting around the room as if looking for an exit or a lawyer. "Luca," she whispered, her voice rasping with sleep. "The time. I need to. The car is scheduled for. Be still." I reached out and wrapped my hand around her wrist. I didn't pull. I just held her there, grounding her. "We breached the contract," she said, the words tumbling out fast. "The NDA explicitly states that physical instruction is to remain clinical. Last night it was a violation of Clause 4, and the Russo incident at the ball. I have to draft a statement. I have to call the lawyer." She was retreating. She was trying to build the wall back up, brick by panic-stricken brick. I sat up, the sheet falling to my waist. I didn't care about modesty. I wanted her to look at me. I wanted her to remember. "Seraphina," I said, my voice rough with morning disuse. "Look at me." She hesitated, then lifted her gaze to mine. "There is no statement," I told her. "There is no lawyer, and there is no contract." "There is always a contract," she argued, trying to pull her wrist free. "That's how we survive. You have a timeline, Luca. The Commission. I am the Commission." I pulled her closer, until her knees bumped against my hip. "Do you think I care what a table of old men thinks about my timeline? Do you think I care about Anna Santoro or the alliances?" I leaned in, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. My touch was gentle, but the intent behind it was absolute iron. "You taught me to identify what matters. You taught me that power is useless if you are a slave to it. Last night I wasn't a slave. I was a king, and I am not abdicating." Seraphina closed her eyes, leaning into my touch despite herself. "This is dangerous, Luca. You know it is. The Russos will view what you did to Franco as an act of war. They'll target me to get to you. Let them come, I said, the darkness in my chest uncoiling, eager for the fight. I hope they do. It will save me the trouble of hunting them down. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a jarring intrusion of the outside world. She reached for it, her professional mask slipping back into place. It's my father, she said, her face paling. Or the security detail. Something is wrong. She answered it, putting it on speaker. Sarah? It wasn't her father. It was Matteo, my head of security. His voice was tight, clipped. Speak, I commanded, leaning over her shoulder. Don, Matteo said, not sounding surprised to hear my voice on her phone. He knew. My men always knew. We have a situation. A package was delivered to the main compound gates 10 minutes ago. It's addressed to Miss Leone. The air in the loft dropped 20 degrees. What is it? I asked, my voice dropping to a lethal quiet. It's a bridal veil, boss, bloody, and a note. Seraphina stopped breathing. Read it, I ordered. It says, the teacher cannot save the student when the school burns down. We will see you at the altar, Luca, or we will see her in a box. The Russos. Seraphina dropped the phone. It clattered onto the hardwood. She looked at me, terror bleaching the color from her lips. They know, she whispered. They know I'm with you. They know I'm the weakness. I looked at the phone. Then I looked at the woman trembling in my bed, the woman who had taught me how to be human. My father would have cut her loose. He would have seen the threat, calculated the risk, and exiled her to save the empire. He would have chosen the crown over the heart. I wasn't my father. I got out of bed, completely unconcerned with my nakedness, and walked to the pile of clothes on the floor. I picked up my trousers. Get dressed, I commanded. Seraphina looked up, tears standing in her eyes. Where are we going? The airport? You have to send me away, Luca. The contract says. I turned on her, zipping my pants. Burn the contract. I walked back to the bed, placed my hands on the mattress, and leaned over her, caging her in. We are not going to the airport. We are going to the Vitiello compound. You are moving into my personal quarters. Today. Luca, you can't. I can! I roared, the sound shaking the glass walls. I am done hiding you in safe houses. I am done pretending you are just an employee. If the Russos want a war, I will give them a massacre. But you are not running. You are staying right where I can see you, where I can touch you. I grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at the monster she had awakened. You stood your ground with me, Seraphina. Now I stand mine for you. Get dressed. We have a wedding to cancel. She stared at me, searching for the hesitant virgin she had met a week ago. He wasn't there. In his place was a Don who finally had something worth killing for. She nodded slowly. The fear was still there, but beneath it, I saw the spark of the woman who had ordered me to my knees. Okay, she whispered. Okay, Luca. I kissed her hard, a promise of violence to the world and devotion to her. Then I turned to find my gun. The education was over. The rain had begun.
Chapter 8. Seraphina. The Vitiello compound was not a home. It was a monument to paranoia. I had worked for the family for 5 years. I had organized the payroll for the guards, scheduled the maintenance for the perimeter sensors, and filed the blueprints for the panic rooms. But I had never actually lived inside the walls. I was the gatekeeper who went home to a quiet apartment in Queens every night. Now, sitting in the passenger seat of Luca's armored Audi as we passed through the triple-reinforced steel gates, I realized I wasn't entering a sanctuary. I was entering a war camp, and I was the cause of the war. The courtyard was swarming. Men in tactical gear, men whose names I knew from spreadsheets, were loading crates of ammunition into SUVs. The air smelled of exhaust fumes and ozone. The atmosphere was electric, terrifying, and focused. "They're mobilizing," I whispered, clutching the strap of my bag. Inside was the pistol Luca had forced into my hand before we left the loft. "Safety off," he had said. "If anyone but me opens your door, shoot." "We are not mobilizing," Luca corrected, his voice calm and terrifyingly devoid of the boyish hesitation I had seen during our first lessons. "We are hunting. There is a difference." He parked the car in the Don's reserved slot, right in front of the main entrance. Before the engine died, Matteo was at the window. Luca got out. I watched them through the bulletproof glass. Matteo, a man twice Luca's age and a veteran of 3 mafia wars, looked at the Don, then looked at me in the passenger seat. He didn't look confused. He looked resigned. Luca said something low. Matteo nodded sharply and tapped the roof of the car, the signal that the perimeter was secure. Luca opened my door. He didn't offer a hand. He reached in and unbuckled my seatbelt, his knuckles brushing the swell of my breast. The possessiveness of the gesture made my breath hitch. "Out," he commanded softly. "Keep your head up. You are not a prisoner here. Do not look like one." I stepped out onto the gravel. Every eye in the courtyard shifted to us. The mechanics, the soldiers, the house staff, they all froze. They knew me as Ms. Leone, the woman who signed their checks and fired them for incompetence. They had never seen me in yesterday's clothes, with messy hair, standing at the Don's right hand. I straightened my spine. I channeled every ounce of the Ice Queen persona I had perfected over a decade. If I was going to be the target on Luca's back, I would be an armored one. "Matteo," I said, my voice steady. "Double the patrol on the north sector. The sensors there have been glitching due to the construction next door. The Russos know that." Matteo blinked, surprised by the command. Then, a slow grin spread across his scarred face. He looked at Luca. "She's already giving orders, boss." "She knows the systems better than you do," Luca said, placing a heavy hand on the small of my back. "Listen to her. If she tells you the sky is green, you paint it green. Understood?" "Understood, Don." Luca guided me up the steps and into the main house. The foyer was a cavern of marble and dark wood, silent and imposing. He didn't stop. He marched me past the guest wings, past the offices, straight to the double doors at the end of the hall. The master suite. I hesitated at the threshold. "Luca, the staff. They'll talk. The commission has spies everywhere." "Let them talk," he said, kicking the door open. "I want them to talk. I want the commission to hear that Seraphina Leone is sleeping in my bed. It saves me the trouble of sending a memo." He pulled me inside. The room was exactly as I expected. Spartan. A massive bed with black sheets, a single reading chair, and walls devoid of art. It was a lonely room. It was the room of a man who didn't expect to share his life. "My closet is through there," he said, pointing to a door. "You'll find shirts. I'll have a wardrobe brought in for you by noon." "I don't need clothes, Luca. I need a computer. I need access to the accounts. If the Russos are moving, they're funding it somehow. I can track the wire transfers. I can freeze their assets before they even buy the bullets." Luca stared at me. The intensity in his eyes softened, just a fraction, into something that looked like awe. He crossed the room and cupped my face in his hands. "I brought you here to keep you safe, Sarah, not to put you to work." "I am not a damsel, Luca," I countered, covering his hands with mine. "I am the best logistical strategist you have. You didn't fall for me because I'm soft. You fell for me because I'm useful." His expression darkened. "I fell for you," he corrected, his thumb tracing my lower lip. Because you are the only person in this world who sees me. Not the Don, not the monk, me. He kissed me, a hard, bruising press of lips that tasted of desperation and war. Fine, he murmured against my mouth. Work. But you do it from the war room, and you stay within arm's reach of me. The war room was a bunker in the basement, lined with screens and tactical maps. When we walked in, the inner circle was already there. 4 capos, men who had killed for Luca's father, looked up. The silence was deafening. They looked at Luca, then at me, then at the pistol tucked into the waistband of Luca's trousers. "Gentlemen," Luca said, his voice cool and echoing in the concrete room, "there has been a change in strategy. The marriage to the Santoro family is off." Capo Rossi, no relation to the rival clan, slammed his hand on the table. "Off? The wedding is in 3 weeks, Luca. The commission will strip you of your rank. They'll sanction a hit on us for breach of contract." "Let them try," Luca said, pulling out the chair at the head of the table. He didn't sit. He turned it and looked at me. "Sit." I sat. It was a breach of protocol so severe I heard one of the men gasp. The Don's chair was sacred. Luca stood behind me, his hands resting on the back of the chair, effectively shielding me with his body while presenting me as his equal. "The Russos have threatened my house," Luca announced. "They sent a threat to Ms. Leone this morning. They believe she is a weakness they can exploit." He looked around the room, meeting every pair of eyes. "They are wrong. She is not a weakness. She is the reason we are going to win this war before it even starts. Seraphina?" He tapped my shoulder. I took a breath. I looked at the map on the screen. I saw the red markers indicating Russo territory. I didn't see danger anymore. I saw numbers. I saw logistics. I saw a puzzle I knew how to solve. "The Russos are cash poor," I said, my voice projecting clearly. "I've been tracking their shell companies in the Caymans. They're leveraging their shipping lines to pay for the new shipment of arms from Eastern Europe. That shipment docks in Newark in 48 hours. The capos stared at me. "If we seize that shipment," I continued, pointing to the harbor on the map, "they default on their loans. The Russians they're buying from will come collecting. We don't have to fight the Russos. We just have to bankrupt them and let the cartel handle the rest." Silence stretched for a beat. Then Capo Rossi let out a low whistle. "She's right. If we hit the docks, they're dead in the water." "Exactly," Luca said, a terrifying pride radiating from him. "We hit the docks tonight. I lead the team." "No," I said, spinning the chair around to face him. "You can't. It's a trap, Luca. They expect you to retaliate with force. They'll be waiting for you at the docks." "I am not sending my men to do a job I won't do myself." "You're not sending anyone," I said, standing up so we were eye to eye. "You're going to attend the opera." The room went dead silent. "The opera?" Luca repeated, his eyes narrowing. "The commission is attending Tosca tonight," I explained, my mind racing 3 steps ahead. "If you show up there, with me on your arm, publicly unbothered, it sends a message that the Russo threat means nothing to you. It gives you an alibi while Matteo takes a skeleton crew to the docks to sabotage the shipment. Not seize it, sabotage it. Sink it." Luca stared at me. The tension between us crackled, hot and heavy. This was the dynamic we had in the bedroom, control and surrender, playing out on a battlefield. He needed to lead. I needed him to be smart. Slowly, a smile curved his lips. It wasn't the nice smile he practiced in the mirror. It was the smile of the wolf. "The opera," he mused. "I hate the opera." "I know," I whispered, straightening his collar. "But you look excellent in a tux." He turned to his men. "You..." "Heard her. Matteo, prep the demolition team. Sink the shipment. The rest of you secure the perimeter. I have a date." As the men scrambled to obey, shouting orders and grabbing phones, Luca grabbed my waist and pulled me into the shadows of the corner. "You are terrifying," he murmured, leaning his forehead against mine. I learned from the best. Tonight, he promised, his voice dropping to a vibration that went straight to my core. After we parade in front of the commission, after we destroy the Russos, I am going to take you back to that room, and I am going to remind you that while you may give the orders in here, in the dark, you are mine. I shivered. The threat of violence outside nothing compared to the promise of pleasure in his eyes. I'm counting on it, Don.
Chapter 9. Luca. The Metropolitan Opera House was a tomb for the living, velvet-lined, gold-gilded, and filled with the decaying stench of old money and older grudges. I hated it. I adjusted the cuff of my tuxedo jacket, feeling the reassuring weight of the customized Walther PPK tucked into the shoulder holster beneath the silk. It was the only honest thing in the room. Beside me, Seraphina adjusted her clutch. She wasn't wearing red tonight. Red was the color of passion, of the lesson. Tonight, she wore black. A floor-length, backless gown of midnight velvet that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. She looked like a shadow brought to life, lethal, elegant, and untouchable. She looked like a Don's wife. "Relax your jaw," she murmured, not looking at me. She was scanning the lobby, her eyes dissecting the crowd with the precision of a sniper. "You look like you're about to murder the tenor." "I might," I grumbled, offering her my arm. "If the aria goes on too long. Remind me why we are here, Sarah?" "We are here," she said, slipping her hand into the crook of my elbow, her touch grounding me instantly. "Because while Matteo is currently sinking $40 million of Russo weaponry into the Newark Bay, you need to be seen sipping champagne and looking bored. It's called plausible deniability." "I prefer just shooting them." "I know. That's why you have me." We moved toward the grand staircase. The flashbulbs started immediately. The press didn't know about the mafia war brewing in the shadows, but they knew money, and they knew power. And tonight, Seraphina and I were radiating both. As we ascended, I felt the shift in the room. The casual conversations died out. Heads turned, the whispers started, a low hiss of speculation. Who is she? Why isn't he with the Santoro girl? Is that the assistant? I kept my face impassive, but inside, a dark, possessive pride uncurled. Let them stare. Let them wonder. We reached the Vitiello private box. It was prime real estate, directly overlooking the stage and, more importantly, directly across from the commission's box. I held the velvet curtain open for her. She stepped inside, and for a second the mask slipped. She looked down at the massive chandelier, her eyes widening with a genuine appreciation for the beauty of it. It was a reminder that before she was my strategist, she was a woman who probably dreamed of nights like this. Nights not stained by blood debts and NDAs. I resolved right then to buy her the damn opera house if she wanted it. "Sit," I said, pulling out her chair. She sat, the black velvet pooling around her feet. I took the seat beside her, angling my body so I was shielding her from the door, while keeping a clear line of sight to the commission across the theater. I saw Sal Marucci raise his opera glasses. He was looking right at us. I didn't wave. I simply stared back until he lowered the glasses, looking unsettled. The lights dimmed. The orchestra swelled. Tosca. A story about a painter, a singer, and a corrupt police chief. Torture, betrayal, murder. It was practically a documentary of my Tuesday. As the soprano began to sing, I felt Seraphina's hand slide onto my thigh. It was high, possessive, her fingers curling into the fabric of my trousers. My breath hitched. "Pay attention to the music, Don," she whispered, her lips brushing my ear. "I can't hear the music," I rasped, covering her hand with mine and pressing it harder against my leg. "I can only feel you." Good. Keep looking forward. If you look at me the way you want to, Sal will have a heart attack. Promise? She suppressed a laugh, the sound vibrating against my shoulder. For an hour, we played the part. We sat in the dark, an image of high society elegance, while under the cover of the shadows, her thumb traced circles on my inner thigh, driving me slowly, agonizingly insane. It was a different kind of torture than the one on stage, a torture of restraint. I wanted to pull her into my lap. I wanted to take her right there in the Vitiello box, in front of God and the Commission. Then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Once, long, the signal. I pulled it out, shielding the screen. A single text from Matteo. Package delivered to the fishes. No casualties on our side. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The Russo shipment, their leverage, their future, was at the bottom of the Atlantic. They were defenseless. I showed the screen to Seraphina. Her eyes glittered in the dark. She didn't smile. She just squeezed my leg, a silent acknowledgement of victory. The lights came up for intermission. "Showtime," I said, standing up. "Let's go pay our respects." We walked out into the corridor. It was crowded, people juggling champagne flutes and discussing the soprano's range. We cut through them like sharks through a school of minnows. We found the Commission in the VIP lounge. Sal Marucci was holding court, looking red-faced and irritated. Standing next to him was Giovanni Santoro, Anna's father. When they saw us, the conversation stopped dead. "Luca," Giovanni spat, stepping forward. He was a small man with a big ego. "You have some nerve showing your face here. My daughter has been crying for 2 days. You embarrassed her at the ball." "I saved her," I corrected calmly. "Anna is a nice girl, Giovanni. She deserves a husband who will notice when she buys a new dress. I am not that man." "You had an agreement," Sal interjected, jabbing a finger in my direction. "The timeline, Luca. You are reckless, parading your secretary around like a trophy. It's an insult to the families." I stepped forward. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I let the monk slide away, revealing the wolf. "She is not a trophy, Sal. And she is certainly not just a secretary." I reached out and pulled, Seraphina flush against my side. "This woman," I announced, my voice carrying over the hushed lounge, "just orchestrated the financial dismantling of the Russo syndicate while sitting in the dark, listening to Puccini. As of 10 minutes ago, the Russos have defaulted on their arms deal. They are finished." Sal's face went slack. "What? How?" "Logistics," Seraphina said smoothly, her voice cool and sharp as cut glass. "And superior strategy. The Vitiello family is now the sole power in the port. You're welcome." The silence that followed was heavy, stunned. They looked at Seraphina with new eyes, not as a bedwarmer, but as a threat, a player. "The wedding is off, Giovanni," I told Santoro, my tone final. "I have made my choice. You can accept it and enjoy the profits of a unified city, or you can fight me. But know this, if you fight me, you fight her, and she is smarter than all of you combined." I didn't wait for a response. I turned to Seraphina. "Are you hungry?" I asked, the menace vanishing from my tone, replaced by simple devotion. "Starving," she admitted, a small smile playing on her lips. "Let's go. I know a place that makes excellent pasta, and it has much better security." We walked away, leaving the most powerful men in New York staring at our backs, speechless. We made it to the lobby before the adrenaline hit. Seraphina laughed, a breathless, incredulous sound. "Did you see Sal's face?" she asked, clutching my arm. He looked like he swallowed a lemon. He looked afraid, I said, stopping at the exit doors. They all did. I turned her to face me, blocking out the paparazzi waiting outside. You were perfect, Sarah. Cold, brilliant, lethal. I had a good teacher, she whispered, adjusting my tie. I shook my head. No, you did that on your own. I leaned down, needing to taste the victory on her lips. I kissed her, deep and slow, ignoring the flashbulbs that erupted through the glass doors. Let them take the picture. Let them put it on the front page. Don Vitiello and his queen. I pulled back, breathless. Let's go home. We have a war to finish. But as we stepped out into the cool night air, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The paparazzi parted too easily. The car, my car, was idling at the curb. But Matteo wasn't in the driver's seat. I grabbed Seraphina, shoving her behind me, my hand flying to my gun. Get down! The window of a passing black sedan rolled down. The barrel of a submachine gun emerged. The opera was over. The shooting had begun.
Chapter 10. Seraphina. The world didn't fade to black. It exploded into white. The sound of the submachine gun was deafening, a mechanical roar that tore through the elegant silence of the Lincoln Center Plaza. Glass shattered, a million diamonds raining down on the pavement. I didn't have time to scream. Luca was moving before the first bullet hit the chassis of the Audi. He slammed his body into mine, the force of it knocking the wind out of me, and tackled me to the concrete behind the engine block of our car. "Stay down," he roared, his voice unrecognizable. It wasn't the cool, commanded tone of the boardroom. It was a guttural, animalistic snarl. Bullets chewed up the asphalt inches from my face. The air filled with the smell of pulverized stone and hot metal. I curled into a ball, my hands over my head, shaking violently. I was a strategist. I dealt in numbers, in logistics, in wire transfers. I didn't deal in this. Above me, Luca was a blur of motion. He wasn't cowering. He was kneeling on one knee, using the car's rim for cover. The Walther PPK was in his hand, and he was firing, measured, rhythmic shots. Bang, bang, bang. There was no panic in his movements, just terrifying efficiency. "Matteo!" I screamed, looking toward the driver's seat. Through the spider-webbed glass, I saw Matteo. He was slumped over the center console, blood dark and slick on his white shirt. He wasn't moving. "He's gone," Luca said, not looking back. He ejected a magazine and slammed a fresh one in with a metallic clack. "Eyes on me, Seraphina. Look at me." I looked up. His face was streaked with grease from the car, his tuxedo jacket torn at the shoulder. But his eyes were burning with a cold, focused rage that stopped my heart. "There are 4 of them," he said, his voice eerily calm amidst the chaos. "2 flanking left, 2 suppressing from the sedan. I need to clear a path to the alley." "Luca, we're pinned," I choked out. The gunfire from the black sedan was relentless. "We can't move." "I can move," he corrected. He looked down at me, and for a split second the wolf softened. "Stay here. If anyone comes around that bumper who isn't me, you use this." He pulled a backup piece, a small ankle gun, from his pant leg and shoved it into my hands. The metal was warm from his skin. "Luca, no." He didn't listen. He vaulted over the hood of the car, exposing himself to draw their fire. "Hey!" he shouted, a challenge that echoed off the opera house walls. The gunfire shifted, tracking him. I watched in horror and awe. Luca moved with a fluid, lethal grace I had never seen. He didn't run. He hunted. He rolled behind a concrete planter, fired 2 shots, and I heard a scream. 1 target down, he was flanking them. He was drawing them away from me. "Stand your ground," I thought, gripping the cold steel of the gun. "He's standing his ground." A shadow fell over me. I looked, up. One of the gunmen had circled the rear of the car while Luca was engaged. He was wearing a ski mask, his weapon raised, aiming directly at my chest. Time froze. I remembered Luca's voice in the safe house. "You are a weapon, Sarah." I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I raised the gun with both hands, just as I'd seen Matteo do 100 times at the range, and I pulled the trigger. The recoil jarred my shoulders. The sound was deafening. The gunman jerked back, clutching his stomach, and fell to the pavement. I stared at him, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I had just shot a man. "Sarah!" Luca was there instantly. He appeared out of the smoke like a demon, checking the fallen man with a professional double tap before hauling me to my feet. "Did you hit him?" he demanded, scanning my body for blood. I think so," I stammered. He looked at the gunman, then at me. A fierce, wild pride blazed in his eyes. "Good girl." He grabbed my hand. "Run." We sprinted toward the alleyway, leaving the carnage of the plaza behind. The sirens were wailing now, getting closer. The NYPD would be here in minutes. In our world, the police were just another gang we had to avoid. We burst into the dark alley, stumbling over trash bags. Luca didn't slow down. He navigated the maze of back streets with an internal GPS, pulling me deeper into the shadows until we reached a nondescript service door 2 blocks away. He kicked it open. It was a kitchen, the back entrance of the restaurant he had promised to take me to. He shoved me inside, locking the heavy steel door behind us and jamming a chair under the handle. Only then did he stop. He collapsed against the stainless steel prep table, his chest heaving. He looked down at his tuxedo. It was ruined, stained with oil and blood, not his. I stood there, shaking, the gun still clutched in my hand. Luca looked at me. He saw the tremors. He saw the shock setting in. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He took the gun from my hand, set it on the table, and then grabbed my face, his hands framing my cheeks with desperate force. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, searching my eyes. "Tell me." "No," I whispered. "I'm fine. Luca, Matteo is—" "I know." His jaw tightened. "He died doing his job. I will honor him. But right now, I need to know that you are whole." He ran his hands down my arms, over my ribs, checking for injuries I might not feel yet. When he found none, he let out a ragged groan and pulled me into a crushing embrace. He buried his face in my neck, inhaling deeply. He was shaking. The man who had just killed 3 people with the efficiency of a machine was shaking because I was safe. "I thought—" His voice broke. "When the glass shattered, I thought I lost you." I wrapped my arms around his waist, holding him up as much as he was holding me. "You didn't lose me. You protected me. You stood your ground." He pulled, back, his eyes dark and intense. "No, Seraphina. We stood our ground. You shot him. You saved yourself." He leaned his forehead against mine. "The Russos are desperate. That was a suicide squad. They know they're finished financially, so they tried to cut the head off the snake." "They failed," I said, feeling a cold, hard resolve harden in my gut. The fear was gone, burned away by the adrenaline. And now they have to pay. Luca straightened up. The Don settled back onto his shoulders, heavy and terrifying. "They will," he promised. He reached for a landline phone on the wall, secure, untraceable. He dialed a number. "It's Vitiello," he said into the receiver. "The opera is over. Burn the Russo compound. Leave nothing standing." He hung up. He turned back to me, extending his hand. It was blood-stained, bruised, and the steadiest thing in the world. "Are you ready to go home, Sarah?" I looked at his hand. I thought about my quiet apartment in Queens. I thought about the NDA. I thought about the safe, boring life I could have had. Then I looked at the man who would burn a city for me. I took his hand. "Take me home, Luca."
Chapter 11. Luca, The Vitiello compound was in lockdown. The floodlights were on, turning the night into a stark, white day. I pulled the stolen getaway car, a dented sedan we'd borrowed 2 blocks from the opera house, up to the main gate. The guards raised their rifles until they saw my face. Then, the gates flew open. I didn't stop for debriefing. I drove straight to the front steps. "Get the doctor!" I barked at the first soldier who ran up to the car. "And get the commission on the secure line. Tell them if they aren't at my table in 1 hour, I will assume they were complicit in the attack, and I will come for them next." I walked around the car to Seraphina's door. She was sitting still, her hands resting in her lap. The blood on her black velvet dress had dried to a crusty, dark maroon. It wasn't her blood, but seeing it on her made my vision swim with red. I opened the door. "Sarah." She looked up. Her eyes were clear. The shock had faded, replaced by a cold, hard porcelain mask. It was the face of a woman who had looked into the abyss and decided to build a castle there. "Is it done?" she asked. "The Russo compound is burning," I confirmed. "My men confirmed the kill order 5 minutes ago. The Russos are history." She nodded slowly. She didn't ask for comfort. She didn't ask for a shower. "Then we have a meeting," she said, stepping out of the car. She refused my hand, standing under her own power. "Do not let me change, Luca." I frowned. "You are covered in blood." "Exactly," she said, her voice steel. "Let them see it. Let them see what happens when they come for us." A fierce, terrible pride swelled in my chest. She wasn't just surviving this world. She was conquering it. The boardroom was silent. The air conditioner hummed, but the men sitting around the mahogany table were sweating. Sal Marucci, Giovanni Santoro, and the heads of the other 2 families sat in their chairs, looking like men awaiting a firing squad. They had heard the news. They knew the Russos had been wiped off the map in a single, coordinated strike. They knew I had walked out of an ambush that should have killed 20 men. The double doors opened. I walked in first. I hadn't changed either. My tuxedo was torn, my shirt stained with grease and Matteo's blood. I threw the Walther PPK onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped in front of Sal. He flinched. "An explanation," Sal stammered, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "Luca, we had no idea. The Russos acted alone. It was madness." "It was an attempt to decapitate the 5 families," I said, remaining standing. "They attacked me. They killed my head of security. They threatened my house." I leaned forward, placing my knuckles on the table. "And you let it happen. You let them borrow money. You let them buy arms. You watched them circle me like vultures, hoping I would fall so you could pick the carcass." "No," Giovanni protested. "We are allies, Luca. We have a contract." "Had," I corrected. "The contract was based on the premise that I needed your support to hold the city. Tonight proved I do not need your support. I removed the threat alone." You cannot rule alone," Sal whispered, looking old and frail. "You need a wife. You need an alliance." "I have a wife," I said. I turned to the door. "Enter." Seraphina walked in. The room gasped. She looked like a nightmare, and a goddess rolled into one. The blood on her dress was a stark, violent statement against her pale skin. Her hair was wild, smelling of smoke and ozone. She didn't look at the floor. She looked at each man in turn, dissecting them with the cold precision I loved. She walked to the head of the table, my chair, and stood beside it. "This," I announced, moving to stand next to her, "is Seraphina Leone. She is the strategist who bankrupted your rivals. She is the soldier who shot the man sent to kill her. And she is the only person in this room I trust with my life." I looked at Giovanni. Your daughter is safe, Giovanni. I sent her home. She is a child. Seraphina is a queen. Do not insult me by comparing them again. I looked at Sal. You demanded an heir. You demanded stability. I placed my hand on Seraphina's waist, marking her. This woman is the only stability you will get. She is the brain behind the Vitiello brawn. You can accept her as my wife and enjoy the most profitable era in the history of our organization. Or you can reject her. I picked up the gun from the table and checked the chamber. But if you reject her, you reject me. And if you reject me, you join the Russos. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Seraphina didn't flinch. She rested her hand on top of mine on her waist. It was a small gesture, but it screamed unity. It screamed touch him and die. Sal Marucci looked at the gun. He looked at the burning intensity in my eyes. He looked at the blood on Seraphina's dress. Slowly, painfully, he stood up. He bowed his head toward Seraphina. Donna Leone, he said, his voice cracking. It is an honor. Giovanni stood next, then the others. One by one, the old guard stood and bowed to the executive assistant they had ignored for years. They weren't bowing to tradition. They were bowing to power. Sit, Seraphina commanded. Her voice was calm, professional, perfect. They sat. She looked at me. A small, private smile touched her lips. The smile she had given me in the elevator. The smile that promised everything. Shall we discuss the new shipping routes, gentlemen? She asked, pulling out the chair at the head of the table. I didn't sit. I stood behind her, my hand on her shoulder, watching the room submit to her intelligence. The monk was gone. The virgin was gone. The king stood guard, and the queen began her reign.
Chapter 12. Seraphina. 9 months later. The antique clock in the corner of the boardroom ticked. Once that sound had terrified Luca. It had been the sound of a countdown, a reminder of his inadequacies and the threats closing in. Now it was just a clock. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, Luca's chair, my chair. The leather was warm beneath me, and the view of the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows was crisp and clear. The winter snow had covered New York in a blanket of white, but inside the Vitiello Tower, it was warm. The shipping manifest for the Q4 projection is conservative, I said, sliding the file across the table to Sal Marucci. Sal didn't sneer. He didn't question my right to be there. He picked up the file with a hand that trembled slightly. Conservative is safe, Donna Leone, Sal mumbled, using the title the families had adopted. Not Mrs. Vitiello. Donna Leone, it was a distinction Luca insisted on. I wasn't just his wife. I was a power in my own right. Safe doesn't buy loyalty, Sal, I corrected, resting my hand on the curve of my stomach. And with the new arrival coming, I want the surplus liquid. Expand the route. Sal nodded immediately. Yes, Donna, of course. The double doors opened. They didn't just open. They swung wide with force. Luca walked in. The room instantly shifted. The capos sat up straighter. The air grew sharper. Even after months of peace, a peace bought with the blood of the Russo syndicate, Luca still commanded a room by simply existing in it. He was wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit, cut to perfection, but his tie was loose and his top button was undone. He looked tired, lethal, and devastatingly handsome. He didn't look at Sal. He didn't look at the charts. He looked straight at me. Out, he commanded. Sal blinked. But Dawn, we haven't finished the... Out! It wasn't a shout. It was a low rumble of thunder. The capos didn't hesitate. They grabbed their files and scrambled for the exit like schoolboys escaping a principal. Within 10 seconds, the boardroom was empty. The door clicked shut. Luca walked toward me. He didn't stop until he was standing between my spread knees, his hands gripping the arms of the chair, caging me in. "You've been in here for 4 hours," he growled, leaning down to press a kiss to my forehead. "You missed lunch." "I was busy securing your empire," I teased, reaching up to toy with his loose tie. "And I had a protein bar." "Unacceptable." He spun the chair around so I was facing him fully. His gaze dropped to my stomach, which was swollen and round beneath my black knit dress. The heir. The requirement. His expression softened, the wolf receding to reveal the man who worshipped me. He placed a large, warm hand over the baby. "He's kicking," Luca murmured, a wonder in his voice that never failed to make my heart ache. "He's impatient, like his father." Luca smirked. "He's stubborn, like his mother." He knelt down, a position that no longer shocked me but still thrilled me. He pressed his face against my belly, murmuring something in Italian to our son. I ran my fingers through his dark hair. It was hard to believe this was the same man who had sat in this office a year ago, terrified of touching a woman. The monk was a distant memory. In his place was a man who touched me constantly, obsessively, as if he needed to reassure himself I was real. "I found the NDA," he said suddenly, his voice muffled against my dress. I froze. I thought I burned it. "You missed a copy. It was in the old archives." He looked up, his gray eyes dancing with amusement. "Clause 7 regarding clinical detachment. I believe we have violated that quite thoroughly. I'm sure I can find a lawyer to sue you for breach of contract." I laughed. "Let them try." He stood up, pulling me with him. "I own the lawyers, I own the judges, and I own the plaintiff." He lifted me onto the edge of the mahogany table, stepping between my legs. The playful mood vanished, replaced by the heavy, hooded heat that still made my knees weak. "Luca," I breathed, glancing at the door. "The staff—" "No better than to enter," he finished, his hands sliding up my thighs, gathering the fabric of my dress. "You spent all morning being the strategist, Sarah. I need the wife." He kissed me, and the world narrowed down to the taste of him. Coffee, power, and unconditional possession. It wasn't the tentative kiss of our first lesson. It was the claiming kiss of a man who knew every inch of me and couldn't get enough. "You know," I whispered against his lips, "I think you've finally mastered lesson 3. "Which one was that?" he murmured, his mouth trailing down my neck. "Subtle dominance." Luca laughed, a low, dark sound against my skin. "There is nothing subtle about how much I want you, Seraphina. I told you once. I visualized you. I claimed you, and I stood my ground." He pulled back, looking at me with a fierce intensity that burned. "You saved me," he said, the words raw and honest. "You didn't just teach me how to fuck, Sarah. You taught me how to live. You turned a ghost into a man." I cupped his face, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "And you gave me a kingdom, Luca. You gave me a home where I didn't have to hide." He turned his head, kissing my palm. "Then the contract is fulfilled," he whispered. "Fulfilled," I agreed. "Good. Then we can negotiate the new terms." "And what are those?" He grinned, lifting me into his arms as he turned toward the private elevator that led to our penthouse. "Lifetime appointment," he said. "No resignation allowed, and mandatory extensive night classes." I laughed, burying my face in his neck as he carried me out of the boardroom, leaving the business of the empire behind. The Russos were dead. The commission was on its knees. The heir was kicking. And the Don and his teacher were just getting started. The end.